It was a quiet Tuesday morning in April 2018 when the news broke. Police had arrested a 72-year-old man in a Sacramento suburb. His name was Joseph James DeAngelo, and he was, they said, the Golden State Killer. The monster who had terrorized California for over a decade. He was the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, the Visalia Ransacker, all of them, one man. The collective shock was immense. He was a grandfather, a former cop. He lived a quiet life on a quiet street. For 40 years, he had been hiding in plain sight. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived. But as the relief washed over communities, a darker, more troubling question began to surface. A question that picked at the edges of the victory. How did he get away with it for so long? It wasn't for a lack of clues, it wasn't because he was a ghost. He left tracks. He made mistakes. He talked to his victims. He taunted the police. Looking back now, with the clarity of knowing his name, the trail seems littered with giant, flashing signs pointing directly at him. The story of the Golden State Killer isn't just a story of a predator, it's also a story of missed chances. Of botched leads, of moments where the entire case could have been cracked decades earlier if just one thing had gone differently. Did police miss their chance? The answer is a difficult and resounding yes. To be fair, we have to understand the world they were working in. The 1970s and 80s were a different era of police work. There was no DNA database. The science was in its infancy. There was no centralized computer system linking precincts across the state. Information lived in filing cabinets, on index cards, and in the heads of detectives. The jurisdictions were like walled cities. A crime in Sacramento County was Sacramento's problem. A crime in Contra Costa County was theirs. The idea that a single man was responsible for burglaries in Visalia, rapes in Sacramento, and murders in Southern California was almost unthinkable. The concept of a prolific serial offender who evolved his crimes over time wasn't part of the standard playbook. They were chasing multiple suspects for what they thought were multiple unrelated crime sprees. They were working in the dark. But even in the dark, there were moments of light. Flashes of opportunity so bright they should have illuminated the whole case. And time and again those flashes faded away, leaving everyone blind once more. The first, and perhaps most significant, missed connection was the one between the East Area Rapist and the Visalia Ransacker. The town of Visalia is in the Central Valley, a few hours south of Sacramento. From 1974 to 1975, it was plagued by a uniquely strange and prolific cat burglar. He was called the Visalia Ransacker. He would break into homes, not always to steal things of value, but to move things around. He'd scatter underwear, go through personal belongings, and leave a quiet sense of violation. He was nimble, athletic, and hard to catch. He seemed to know when people were home and when they weren't. Then, the Ransacker's crimes escalated. He shot at a homeowner who surprised him. And on September 11th, 1975, he tried to kidnap the 16-year-old daughter of a journalism professor, Claude Snelling. Snelling woke up, confronted the masked intruder in his carport, and was shot twice and killed. The Ransacker had become a murderer. A Visalia detective, Bill McGowan, spotted a suspicious man in a backyard near the Snelling murder scene. He shouted at him to freeze. The man turned, fired his gun, and shattered McGowan's flashlight. Then he vaulted a fence and disappeared into the night, but McGowan got a good look at his face. It led to a composite sketch of a young, athletic man with a round, almost baby-like face. The Ransacker case went cold, he just stopped. Then, about a year later, in the summer of 1976, a new terror began in the eastern suburbs of Sacramento. The East Area Rapist. His methods were eerily similar to the Ransackers. He was an expert prowler. He learned the layouts of neighborhoods, the schedules of his victims. He broke in silently. He spent time in the houses before his victims came home, eating their food, drinking their drinks. He would bind them, place teacups on their backs, and threaten to kill them if he heard the cups rattle. He was an organized, methodical predator. The connection seems obvious now. The time gap was small, the geographic distance wasn't that great, the prowling, the athletic ability, the sheer audacity of both criminals were nearly identical. But the connection wasn't made in any meaningful way. It was floated, sure. A few detectives probably wondered, but the Visalia crimes were burglaries and one murder. The Sacramento crimes were rapes. They were filed in different cabinets, handled by different departments, and treated as separate problems. And here's the most damning part. Where was Joseph DeAngelo in 1974 and 1975? He was a police officer in Exeter, a tiny town right next to Visalia. He was there for the entire duration of the Ransacker's reign of terror. He was a cop. He had a gun. He knew police procedures and patrol patterns. He would have known exactly how to evade capture in the very area he was sworn to protect. He was the perfect suspect, hiding where no one would ever think to look. The composite sketch from the Snelling murder looked a lot like a young DeAngelo. but his name never came up. No one thought to look at the roster of local cops in the surrounding towns. The idea that one of their own could be a monster of this magnitude was just too far-fetched. The files stayed in their separate cabinets, and the East Area Rapist continued his spree, his past as the Visalia Ransacker a secret that protected him. That single failure to connect Visalia to Sacramento was a colossal missed opportunity. It meant that for the rest of his criminal career, investigators were starting from scratch. They didn't have the background of the Ransacker's earlier, less violent crimes to build a profile. They didn't have the Visalia sketch as a primary lead. They were missing the first half of the story. But the missed chances didn't stop there. Perhaps the most infuriating, the most unbelievable, was the one that happened in Auburn, California in 1979. By this point, the East Area Rapist had attacked dozens of people across Sacramento, Contra Costa, and other Northern California counties. He was the most wanted man in the state. A massive task force was dedicated to finding him. They had sketches, witness statements, and a psychological profile. They knew he was bold, angry, and meticulous. Joseph DeAngelo had moved on from the Exeter Police Department. He was now a police officer in Auburn, a city right on the edge of the East Area Rapist hunting grounds. He had been an Auburn cop since 1976, the same year the rape series began. In July 1979, Officer Joseph DeAngelo was caught shoplifting. It wasn't for something big or valuable. He stole a can of dog repellent and a hammer from a Pain Save store. He was arrested, charged, and promptly fired from the Auburn Police Department. Let that sink in. A police officer, in the middle of the East Area Rapist territory, was fired for stealing dog repellent and a hammer. Dog repellent. One of the signature weapons of the East Area Rapist was his use of some kind of spray to subdue dogs that might alert families to his presence. He was known for neutralizing family pets. And a hammer. A simple, brutal tool. His crimes were often described as a form of blunt, masculine rage. And here was a cop, a man with inside knowledge of police work, a man who fit the general physical description, a man who lived in the area, getting fired for stealing 2 items that were directly relevant to the crimes. So it was more than a red flag, it was a bonfire. This should have been the end of his reign of terror. It was the perfect lead. Any cross-check of recently dismissed officers in the region against the case files for the East Area Rapist should have put DeAngelo's name at the very top of the list. His motive for the crimes could even have been explained by the rage and humiliation of being fired. The timeline fit, the tools fit, the man fit, but nothing happened. The report of his firing sat in a file at the Auburn PD. The East Area Rapist case files sat in another file at the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. The two were never connected. Again, the walls between jurisdictions, and perhaps a failure of imagination, prevented the dots from being joined. No one at the Sacramento Task Force was systematically checking the personnel files of surrounding police departments for disgraced officers. No one in Auburn, hearing about the firing, thought to pick up the phone and call the East Area Rapist hotline to say, "Hey, you might want to look at this guy we just fired." It was the single greatest investigative fumble of the entire case. The path to his front door was laid out, paved, and lit with neon signs, and everyone walked right past it. After DeAngelo was fired, the Northern California rape attack stopped. He moved to Southern California with his wife, and the crime spree changed. He became the original Night Stalker, graduating from rape to rape murder. The firing didn't stop him, it just displaced him. Beyond these 2 massive case-breaking misses, there were other clues that seemed to fall through the cracks. Many victims and witnesses reported that the attacker seemed to have knowledge of police work. He was calm under pressure, he used police terminology, he once told a victim he would be back if she called the police, suggesting he'd know. The idea that he might be a cop or have a military background was a primary theory for a long time. Investigators even interviewed hundreds of military personnel and police officers. But the net was cast too wide, or not deep enough. They were looking for someone who fit a heroic movie cop profile, not a disgruntled, fired patrolman from a small town department. The clue was there, but their interpretation of it was flawed. DeAngelo, the quiet, unassuming cop from Exeter and Auburn, slipped right through. Then there were the composite sketches. There were dozens of them over the years. Some were laughable, others were chillingly accurate. One sketch from an attack in Contra Costa County showed a man with a wide face, deep-set eyes, and a somewhat boyish look. It looks remarkably like photos of DeAngelo from that era. But other sketches showed a man with a long, narrow face and sharp features. The conflicting images created confusion. Instead of focusing on a type, investigators were chasing multiple contradictory descriptions. The eyewitness testimony, especially from terrified victims in the dark, is notoriously unreliable. The sketches became a source of noise rather than a signal, muddying the waters and sending police down countless dead ends. The psychological clues were also profound. At one crime scene, investigators found a spiral notebook. In it was a handwritten essay, a rambling, angry piece of homework seemingly stolen from a student's binder. It was filled with bizarre, violent imagery and phrases. He had written all over it, childishly, angrily. The most famous line was, "Make this a reality." It was a direct window into his mind, a place of rage, fantasy, and a desire for punishment. FBI profilers studied it, but what could they do with it? It told them he was disturbed, but it didn't give them a name. There was another frustrating piece of the puzzle that fit perfectly once they had DeAngelo, a man known for his sudden explosive temper, but was useless in finding him. He also taunted people. He made terrifying phone calls to victims for months, sometimes years, after he attacked them. He'd whisper, gonna kill you," in a high-pitched, menacing voice. He even called the police and the media. They had his voice on tape. But this was long before advanced voice print analysis. The technology simply wasn't there to match his voice to a specific person. The calls were terrifying. They confirmed he was still out there, but they were another dead end. They were clues from the future, evidence that couldn't be properly analyzed by the science of the day. It's easy, of course, to be an armchair detective 40 years later. We have the benefit of hindsight. Right? We know his name, we've seen his face. We can lay out all the clues on a table and see the perfect, straight line that connects them all. The detectives at the time didn't have that luxury. They were in the middle of a storm, with clues flying at them from all directions. They were overwhelmed. The sheer volume of tips, suspects, and leads was staggering. Over the years, thousands of people were looked at for these crimes. The real suspect was just one name among a sea of possibilities. We also can't ignore the heroes of this story, the detectives who never gave up. People like Larry Crompton, Richard Shelby, and Carol Daly from Sacramento. They lived and breathed this case for years. It haunted them. They chased every lead, no matter how small. They interviewed every victim with compassion and professionalism. They looked into the eyes of a terrified community and promised to find the man responsible. They failed, but it wasn't for lack of trying. Their dedication was immense. And later, a new generation picked up the torch. Detectives like Paul Holes, who dedicated his career to solving cold cases and became obsessed with the Golden State Killer. He was one of the key figures who kept the case alive, pushing for new DNA tests and exploring new theories long after others had given up. And then there was the late Michelle McNamara, a true crime writer who gave the killer his now famous name. Her book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, brought the case back into the national spotlight and put immense public pressure on law enforcement to finally solve it. She built a community of online sleuths and pieced together the disparate crimes into a single, terrifying narrative. Her work was instrumental in creating the momentum that led to the final push. The ultimate irony is that none of the botched leads mattered in the end. He wasn't caught because someone finally connected the dots between the Visalia Ransacker and the East Area Rapist. He wasn't caught because someone remembered the disgraced Auburn cop who stole dog repellent. He was caught by science. Investigators used a DNA sample from one of the crime scenes, preserved for decades, and uploaded it to a public genealogy website. The kind of site where people send in their saliva to find out their ancestry and connect with distant relatives. They weren't looking for him, they were looking for his great-great-grandparents. By building a family tree from his DNA, they found distant cousins. From there, they worked their way down through the generations, looking for a man of the right age who lived in the right places at the right times. The search narrowed. It led them to a handful of men. It led them to Joseph James DeAngelo. They put him under surveillance. They collected a DNA sample from the door handle of his car and another from a tissue he threw in a trash can. They took it to the lab. It was a perfect match. The tool that finally caught him didn't exist when he was committing his crimes. It was a futuristic solution to an old school problem. And in a way, that makes the missed opportunities even more tragic. The answer was right there. It was tangible. It was in a police report about a shoplifting incident. It was in the memory of a detective who had his flashlight shot out of his hand. It was in the files of 2 different police departments that failed to talk to each other. So did they miss their chance? Yes. They missed it when they didn't see the Visalia Ransacker and the East Area Rapist as the same man. They missed it when they didn't think to check the local police rosters for suspects. And they missed it, spectacularly and unforgivably, when an Auburn cop was fired for stealing a hammer and dog repellent, and no one thought to connect it to the most prolific rapist in the state. The arrest of Joseph DeAngelo was a triumph of modern technology and dogged persistence. It brought a measure of peace to the victims who had waited a lifetime for justice. But it's also a cautionary tale, a story about the limits of human investigation, the walls we build between ourselves, and the simple, obvious clues that can hide in plain sight. For 40 years, a monster lived a normal life. He raised a family, he went to the grocery store. He retired. all because of a series of mistakes and misconnections that allowed him to slip back into the shadows time and time again, leaving a trail of devastation that stretched across an entire state and scarred a generation. The truth was there. They just couldn't see it.